Out of all the villains that exist in Dragon Ball, Cell was only around for a short period of time, but he did a lot of damage during that time span, enough to become one of the most iconic villains in the series. However, have you ever wondered just how many years in jail Cell would get if he were made to stand trial? Join me in today's newest installment of Anime's Most Wanted over here on the Anime Explained channel, where we take a look at all the crimes carried out by your favorite anime characters, from villains to anti-heroes to even the heroes in some of these cases, and determine what their prison sentence would be. Leave your suggestion for the next character you want me to cover, and if you want to see me do this for Naruto characters, check out my Naruto Explained channel. For this video, we're obviously going to be using the Japanese legal system to determine the sentences, which you should find interesting given how laws differ in Japan versus America, and obviously Cell would get several death penalties, so we're just going to equate each death penalty or life sentence as a jail sentence for the average number of years that a Japanese male lives, which is 81 years old. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at how long Cell from Dragon Ball's manga would go to jail. For the crime of murdering future Trunks in the original timeline, Cell would get convicted of murder. The key crimes would be committed by Cell being the future timeline, where he murdered future Trunks. The applicable law would be Article 199 of the Japanese Penal Code, which is homicide. A person who kills another shall be punished with death or imprisonment with work for life or a definite term not less than 5 years. The sentence typically is life imprisonment or the death penalty, depending on the mitigating circumstances. Given that future Trunks is a hero and Cell committed a premeditated, cold-blooded murder in order to go back in time, the death penalty and life imprisonment, that's the most likely outcome. You also have the theft of the time machine, which, given the nature of the machine, it could count as being a government classified weapon or tool. The applicable law would be Article 235 of the Japanese Penal Code, which is theft. A person who steals the property of another shall be punished by imprisonment with work for no more than 10 years or a fine of not more than 500,000 yen. Aggravated theft, if it's deemed to be national property, that would be Article 235-2, which is special theft such as government or military property, and that can cover with more severe punishments. Now, the additional charge would also be Article 96, which is the destruction of damage of important public property. That would be applied if you could argue this time machine was to be considered state-owned property. The sentence, regardless, would be 5 years to 15 years in jail, potentially more, depending on how you argue the validity of the time machine being government property. Now, the unauthorized use of the time machine, which would be illegal time travel, since time travel technically isn't covered under Japanese law, because obviously we can still draw some parallels. It would be a violation of national security and international law. If this is the equivalent to tampering with international treaties or global peace through time intervention, it could be prosecuted under national security statutes, espionage, and even terrorism laws. The latter is the more likely one here. Time travel alters history, and it could be deemed to be that act of terrorism. That would be a sentence of 10 years up to life in prison. Obviously, life in prison. But since this is Cell's first time offense doing this, we're just going to give him 10 years here. Now, tampering with or altering historical events causing timeline changes, this would fall under the crimes against the state, particularly when it comes to subversion, which is undermining social or government order, obstruction of justice, since these actions can change past legal decisions. Mass deaths and disasters result from his timeline interference, so that would also be negligent homicide and endangerment to general society. You also have the crime of the destruction of the time capsule. That's evidence tampering, and that's destruction of property. The applicable laws would be Article 258, which is destruction of property, and Article 104, which is the destruction of evidence, because the time capsule is something that serves as proof of crimes, and it could be a asset that could be used by the government. The sentence for this is 5 years. Now, additional charges would be illegal abandonment of a vehicle. This would fall under the applicable law of waste management and public cleansing law. So specifically, Article 16 of the Japanese Penal Code prohibits the unauthorized dumping of or abandonment of general or industrial waste. Under Japanese law, abandoning a car or a similar machine, in this case, a time machine, that would qualify as an illegal dumping of industrial waste. The penalty here under Article 25, under the same law, would be up to 10 million Japanese yen, which is roughly 90,000 US dollars, and imprisonment of 5 years in jail. This could also open up the door for civil liability as well because of potential environmental damage. Now, leaving behind a biological remnant of Cell's molting husk in that rural area, it would also carry additional charges under Japanese law, especially because it is unregulated, and due to the nature of Cell's creation, it might pose environmental risk. But even if it doesn't, he wouldn't be charged with anything less than breaking the waste management and public cleansing law under Article 16. And due to it being biological in nature and it potentially being able to cause a public fear if anyone normal had found it, which would have triggered a biohazard law, this would escalate to Article 25, which is the illegal dumping of biological waste, and that is 5 years in jail. So in Dragon Ball Volume 30, also known as Dragon Ball Z Volume 14, Cell wipes out an entire town and he kills the reporter. This escalates to mass murder and the murder of a civilian by killing the reporter that is there, which would also cause social terror and public mass panic. The new charges here would be the murder of everyone in Gingertown. The applicable law would be Penal Code Article 199, homicide, and because there are multiple victims, you would have the multiple victims clause. This increases the severity. For reference, the average city in Japan has 50,000 people per city, which is what we will assume is the case here, since Gingertown did not appear to be a major metropolitan area like the one that Boma lives in. We can, for all intents and purposes, say that Boma lives in an area that is like Tokyo that has 1 million people in it, for instance. So additional considerations to take into account are if the murder is indiscriminate or conducted with extreme cruelty. The court may consider it heinous enough for the death penalty, which obviously they would here. Japan has sentenced individuals to death for as few as 2 or 3 murders, especially when it's done with malice or for show. Cell killed hundreds of thousands of people over his entire span in the manga. In this instance, he killed 50,000 in one city. You also have the murder of the news reporter. The applicable law would be Penal Code Article 199, homicide. You would also have Cell charged with obstruction of official duties because the reporter was actively broadcasting. And he would also be charged under the law that applies for crimes against press of freedom or public interest. The symbolic weight here would be huge. Killing a journalist on air would not only be viewed as murder, but it will be viewed as a deliberate attack on public communication and national morale. Similar instances are basically terrorism causes in Japan, and they are treated particularly egregious in Japanese law. This obviously would see Cell with life in prison. Now, we're also going to get into the full villainous rap sheet. Let's lock in for more of the crimes that Cell committed as imperfect Cell, especially around his encounters with Piccolo, Future Trunks, and Krillin. So you have the murder of the civilian that was held hostage during the Piccolo encounter. Cell holds a civilian hostage while talking to Piccolo, then kills him without hesitation. The applicable law would be Article 199, homicide, Article 60, principal offender, and it may be treated as murder in furtherance of another crime because he did attempt to murder Piccolo here. You also have other aggravating factors. He killed a hostage during a situation. It was cold-blooded and it was used as a show of power. This would be murder during a hostage situation. This would be life in prison or the death penalty. Then you have the assault and the attempted murder of Piccolo. Cell and Piccolo battle in a serious fight. Cell pierces Piccolo's arm, drains him of some of his energy, and attempts to kill him after weakening him. The applicable laws would be Article 204, which is injury intentionally inflicting physical harm. Article 203, attempted murder. The charge would be aggravated assault and attempted murder. This would be 15 years just for the injury and the assault. And then the attempted murder itself starts out at 15 years. And it depends on the severity and the nature of premeditation. And it can go all the way up to life in prison. Now, the temporary blinding of Piccolo, Trunks, and Krillin via the solar flare. Cell basically uses the solar flare to blind all 3 fighters to temporarily escape. The applicable laws would be Article 204, causing blindness, since the blindness lasts for a short period of time, and then also assault. Even though it's not a non-permanent injury, it is still an injury that occurs. It could also be seen as an obstruction of justice if we view Trunks and Krillin as acting in the defense of the public, which they were. The realistic analogy here would be using a flashbang grenade or pepper spray on civilians and law enforcement. This would get Cell 5 years in jail just for doing this. Now, we have to add in the small town that Cell attack right after fleeing Trunks and Piccolo in the manga. So in Volume 31 of Dragon Ball, also known as Dragon Ball Z Manga Volume 15, Cell reaches a new area and it is a small one. After counting the structures on the page, there appear to be roughly 15 homes, give or take, and 6 larger buildings. It might be commercial or government in nature. The average Japanese household is 2.3 people per home, but rural areas in Japan are slightly larger, so we'll just go with 3 people per household on a conservative estimate. So the estimated residents for 15 homes would be 45 residents. Then you have 6 additional buildings. These could be local government offices, they could be a post office, a school or a daycare, small shops, markets, a clinic, a police substation. We don't know. Assuming even minimum occupancy, we can expect 3 to 8 people staffing each building, possibly 1 to 3 civilians and clients in each. So we're going to conservatively estimate there are 5 people per building. With there being 6 buildings, that's 30 people. So this would be at a bare minimum 75 people. That is a low end estimate. If the town was active and had multi-level apartments, this number could easily triple. This would bring about the following charges: mass murder, yet again. This would be under Penal Code Article 199, which is murder. You could trump this up to serial mass murder at that. This would obviously be the death penalty. You have destruction of property, so the private homes, that's 15 private homes. You have destruction of public and commercial buildings, that is 6 right there. That would be Japanese law Article 260, which would be arson or destruction of inhabited buildings. That is at a bare minimum 5 years, and because of the wide scale nature, it could be life in prison. Article 261 is the destruction of private property, which that is a 3-year jail sentence. Because of life and infrastructure being destroyed, the total value would range from anywhere from 500 million to 2 billion yen, triggering the compensation law and the Disaster Relief Act process. This would get Cell another 10 to 15 years stacked onto his charges. Now, a day after Vegeta and Trunks entered into the room of Spirit in Time to train, the manga tells us that the number of victims for Cell has entered into the hundreds of thousands. Since there's not an exact number, but it was kept under 1 million in total, we're gonna say on a conservative end that Cell wiped out 500,000 people. While Piccolo fights 17, Cell is also shown in the manga killing 2 more people from the office building. So the additional charges would be mass murder for 500,000 people. For extra context, during Cell's rampage leading up to the Cell games, it is explicitly stated that he absorbs and kills entire villages, towns, and even cities. It causes global panic, with the narrator saying later on in the story that the world had forgot the boy named Son Goku who saved them from Piccolo. The narrator confirms in Dragon Ball Volume 34 that hundreds of thousands of lives were lost before Cell announced the Cell game. So we'll use that low-end estimate of 500,000 victims. The relevant Japanese law would be Penal Code Article 199, which is murder. You have multiple counts of murder, especially at this scale, that will fall under crimes against humanity and serial mass murder. You could even charge him under systemic mass murder of civilians. The jail sentence here would be the death penalty, mandatory at this case. It would also qualify for national disaster level terrorism laws. In the real world, Japan, this would exceed any historical precedent and invoke international tribunal level proceedings. Now, you also have the double homicide in the office building. So for context, Piccolo battles Artificial Human 17 outside, better known as Android 17 for the dub watchers. Cell infiltrates a nearby office building and kills 2 civilians, shown in both manga panels as well as in the anime. This isn't part of the 500,000 above, so that warrants a separate charge. This would be Penal Code Article 199, which is murder. This would be life imprisonment or the death penalty. Given Cell's track record, this would stack with existing capital charges. Then he gets even more charges here. So you have the attempted unlawful imprisonment of 17 via absorption. So Cell attempts to forcibly absorb 17, which would trap him inside of Cell's body permanently, effectively a irreversible form of bodily imprisonment and erasure of individual consciousness. The relevant Japanese laws would be Penal Code Article 220, unlawful capture and confinement. Penal Code Article 221, kidnapping for gain, damage, or harm. Article 246, fraud and deception to gain benefit. This would be extrapolated to biological gain through absorption. The sentence here would be 10 years per count. Given the intent to erase identity and gain power, charges would escalate to attempted bodily destruction for gain. Then you have the attempted murder of Piccolo. The context here is that Cell shot a ki blast straight through Piccolo's chest, leaving him gravely injured and presumed to be dead for a time. This is unquestionably attempted homicide. The relevant law here would be Penal Code Article 203, attempted murder. This would be anywhere from 15 to up to 20 years in prison, if not life in prison, due to the pattern that Cell has displayed here. Then you have the assault of 17 and Piccolo during the forest battle. This is a separate charge here. So during that intense fight, Cell violently assaulted 17 and Piccolo, throwing them through the terrain, pummeling them, and using several energy blasts. This would be Penal Code Article 204 due to the assault nature and the bodily harm. This would be 15 years in prison per victim for a total of 30 years. Then you have environmental destruction from powering up and fighting. When Cell battles, especially at the start, it resulted in widespread damage that was done to that area, from just the nature of powering up to all the damage done as they were fighting. So this would be basic environmental law, that act being Act number 91 of 1993. You also have the Forest Act for deforestation and destruction of natural zones. You also have the opportunity to charge him under the Natural Parks Act, since these were uninhibited islands that they're fighting on, which they would be protected under that, because they would be ecologically protected. Then when you look at that, that's 5 years per major incident. Then you have more added charges here. So you have the attempted murder of 16, Android 16. During this battle with Piccolo and 16, Cell fiercely attacked 16, attempting to eliminate him once 16 posed a serious threat. This includes launching several deadly ki blasts and attempting to overpower him physically. So this would be Penal Code Article 203, attempted murder. This would be anywhere from 20 years in prison up to life in prison. Then you have the absorption of 17. This would be unlawful imprisonment and destruction of a sentient being. This would also be homicide and manslaughter related, as well as kidnapping for personal benefit and the destruction of that sentient being, which is covered under future AI related and robotic personhood laws. And because 17 is technically a human who has been modified, you could double charge him here. Now, this would be Penal Code Article 199 for murder, Penal Code Article 220 to 221, unlawful confinement and kidnapping, and then Article 246 for fraud and deception for gain. This would be life in prison. And then because of the kidnapping and imprisonment charges, he would get another 5 to 10 years. Then you have the attempted murder of Tien Shinhan and Goku for attempting to save Piccolo and Tien. Cell attacked Goku when he saved Tien and Piccolo from him. Goku was targeted for trying to protect others, and they were caught in the middle. So this would be Penal Code Article 203, attempted murder. This would be 20 years to life in prison. He could also be charged because of the intent to kill while Goku is performing a public act of defense, because that would escalate the charges because he was trying to save Tien and Piccolo. You also have the destruction of 3 inhabited islands. This is 500 people per island. So Cell destroyed 3 inhabited islands during his attack, which is inhibited by 500 people per island. And this is based on Japan's average for island populations. This would be under Penal Code Article 204, destruction of property with life and injury. This would also be under environmental protection laws and natural disaster charges, because it has the indirect death caused by the islands. This would be charged up to mass casualties, since that's 1,500 people, which is up to 50 years in prison at a minimum, or life in prison. He would also face fines for ecological damage to the natural habitat, as well as for human costs. Then you have assault and bodily harm charges. He has the assault on Vegeta, blinding Trunks in 16 and Krillin in 18, assault on Trunks, attempted murder of Krillin, attempted murder of Vegeta, attempted and successful absorption of 18, that is imprisonment. So this would be under Penal Code Article 204, assault and bodily harm, Penal Code Article 203, attempted murder, Penal Code Article 220, unlawful imprisonment / absorption. For the assault on Vegeta, that will be 10 years in prison. For blinding Trunks and Krillin in 16 and 18, that is 5 years per incident. The attempted murder of Krillin and Vegeta, that is 20 years bare minimum each. for the absorption of 18. That is life in prison or the death penalty. Then you have the destruction of homes and buildings for the Cell Games Arena, because at a bare minimum, we have 2 families that were killed. So Cell destroyed 2 homes in order to clear the space for the Cell Games in the manga, and that likely led to the death of at least 2 families in the process. So this is under Article 204 of the Penal Code, that is destruction of property leading to loss of life. Penal Code Article 200, which is murder and mass slaughter by means of destruction. This would be life in prison or the death penalty, as well as murder resulting from destruction of property. Then you have the construction of a tournament area without a permit. That is by changing the landscape. Cell altered the landscape in that rural area to create the Cell Games Arena without a proper zoning permit and illegal construction, because when you're a villain, who cares about some red tape? So the relevant law would be urban planning and zoning law. The illegal construction without permits, this would be under Penal Code Article 208, illegal land modification. This would be 5 years in prison and fines for a land use violation and environmental damage. Then you have the hijacking of the TV station for the Cell Games broadcast, and also the murder of a news anchor. Also, Cell, in the process, destroyed the building with a key blast, caused structural damage to the roof and the walls and the ceiling. This would be covered under Penal Code Article 204, assault. Penal Code Article 220, murder and destruction of property. Penal Code Article 109, hijacking and coercion of public service. This would be life in prison for the death of the news anchor, as well as an additional 10 to 15 years for property destruction. Then you have the additional charge of destruction of a city block which killed civilians. So for context, in this same scene, Cell destroys an entire city block, likely during primetime hours since the newscast is going on, which that would have a population of roughly 500 people during active daytime hours. This would be under Penal Code Article 204, destruction of property leading to mass loss of life. Penal Code Article 220, murder that is leading to death from destruction. This would be life in prison or the death penalty for the 500 civilian deaths. Then you have global fear and terror induced by the TV broadcast. So for context, Cell's worldwide broadcast of the Cell Games, it caused mass panic and psychological terror across the globe, resulting in fear-induced trauma. The relevant law would be the Public Safety Act, creating terror or fear and psychological harm. This would be under Penal Code Article 99, disturbing public order. He would be charged under incitement of global terror and public disturbance. So this would be 10 years in jail and fines for inducing fear to the public. Now let's add in more charges for Cell killing an entire military company that came with tanks and aircrafts to attack him, and examine what would apply under Japanese law here. So charges for killing an entire military company, including tanks and aircrafts, as well as all of their military equipment. He would be charged with the murder of military personnel, since the entire military company was killed, assuming that the total includes dozens or a couple hundred soldiers, which is accurate. This would qualify for mass murder. Penal Code Article 199 for murder would apply here. This would be life in prison and the death penalty. You also have destruction of military property, so that would be the tanks and the aircrafts and the guns. Cell would be held responsible for the destruction of these, since they're valuable military property. Under Penal Code Article 205, this would also be applied to military property, and that will be 20 years in prison. Then you have the assault on the armed forces. That's another 15 years added on top of this. Then you have war crimes and international law violations. If we consider the military assault and the destruction of the military property in the context of international law, such as the Geneva Conventions and the international war crime statuses, then Cell's actions would likely be classified as war crimes due to the excessive nature of his attacks on the military personnel and their assets. This would be life in prison or the death penalty. Now, he would also be charged for the murder of the military commanding officers here and attempted murders if any of them survive, which they didn't. This would be under Penal Code Article 203, and he would get 20 years sentence for each officer killed. And he would also get life in jail for each officer killed as well. Then you have the collateral damage that is done. This is the endangerment of public land. This would be under Penal Code Article 202. This would be 10 years in jail. Then he would be charged for hosting the Cell Games tournament without a permit. The Cell Game tournament was an unofficial event. There were several key issues here. There's the lack of a permit. Cell did not obtain any government or legal permits to host this tournament, which would be required for any large event, especially one with international implications involving death matches like we saw. Hosting an event without proper authorization would violate local event planning laws. You also have unlawful assembly. The Cell Games involve large crowds, significant public safety risk, and even fatalities. This could be seen as an illegal assembly due to the violence and the lack of legal permissions. Local Japanese ordinances in Japan would crack down. This would give Cell 5 years in prison as well as several fines. Then you have the disruption of public order and peace. Given the violent nature of the event and the chaos that it caused, Cell would also face charges for disrupting public order and causing unnecessary public panic. This would be under Penal Code Article 105, disturbance of the peace. This would give him 3 years in prison or fines for disturbing public order. Then you have the charges for mass destruction during the Cell versus Goku fight. So during this battle with Cell and Goku, it resulted in massive environmental damage once the ring was destroyed. This would see Cell charged with up to 20 years imprisonment due to all the craters left on the ground and all the wide-scale damage that was done, as well as extra damage done to the environment as a result of this. Because you also had the news crew that was there, Cell could also be charged with another 10 years of imprisonment for endangering their safety. And because the Cell Games are hosted in an open area, a likely rural area based on what we saw, undeveloped outside of the few homes we saw, Japan has very strict environmental protection laws, and Cell's battle, because of all the debris that was created and all the wide-scale pollution that's coming from all that dust being fired all over the place and all the damage caused by the energy blasts and the debris, that will be another 10 years stacked on top of this. Now, for the Cell Games, it does get tricky from here on out because in the beginning, it's just a tournament. But once Cell blows up the ring, you can argue that it ceases to be a tournament at this point, and instead it's an all-out fight. And that's how we're going to treat everything moving forward. So Android 16, because he's an ally to the Z Fighters, and he's a somewhat innocent party in all of this, he would be protected when Cell murders him. So he would be charged on the Penal Code Article 199, the intentional killing of an unarmed individual, because Android 16 was just a head at this point. This would be life in prison. Then you have the unlawful creation of the Cell Juniors. So creating and using the Cell Juniors for the explicit purpose of violence, including the murder of others, is a violation of human rights, and it could be classified as an unlawful creation. This would be 20 years imprisonment for unlawful creation of lethal entities. Then him ordering the Cell Juniors to murder Goku, Piccolo, Tien, Trunks, Yamcha, Vegeta, and Krillin. This would be under Penal Code Article 199, and this would be attempted murder for each count, which could be at a bare minimum 20 years per count or life in prison. Then you have the murder of Goku, King Kai, and King Kai's pet monkey Bubbles. This would be under Penal Code Article 199. This would be the death penalty, and because Bubbles is a animal, he could also be charged with animal cruelty, but because Bubbles is dead, the likely charge is just murder. If you want to consider Bubbles an animal, then that would be 5 years. Now, the attempted murder of Gohan, this would be under Penal Code Article 203. This would be 20 years in prison given the severe nature of the crime, especially because Gohan is a minor. Then you have the failed destruction of the planet from his first Kamehameha blast, where Cell shot that ki blast off from the sky when he fought against Gohan. It was an attempt to destroy the planet, but Gohan countered it. This would count as terrorism and attempted mass murder of the entire planet and its inhabitants. This would be life in prison and the death penalty, and he would also be charged under the terrorism law. Then you have the destruction of King Kai's planet, a sacred world. Because this is the unlawful destruction of a Kaioshin's planet, this would also count as crimes against deities and the destruction of a sacred space. Treat this like destroying a shrine in Shintoism that is in Japan. This would be up to life imprisonment. Then you have the murder of the current future Trunks. So the current Trunks that is at the Cell Games, he was killed by Cell here. This would be classified as murder under Penal Code Article 199. This would be life in prison or the death penalty. Then you have the attempted murder of Vegeta. Once again, Cell attempted to kill Vegeta on multiple occasions, including Vegeta's severe injuries from the battle here, where he sees his son killed. Vegeta tries to attack and Cell comes through and tries to kill him here. This would be under Penal Code Article 203. This would be 20 years of imprisonment up to life in prison. Then you have the attempted murder of Gohan and the breaking of Gohan's arm. We'll charge him with just the breaking of Gohan's arm because Gohan jumped in the way to save Vegeta. This would be assault under Penal Code Article 208, and because Gohan's arm is broken, that would be 5 years in jail. Then you have the second attempted destruction of Earth when Gohan and Cell have their Kamehameha battle where they're beam clashing each other. This would be terrorism and attempted mass murder, which would also be life in prison. Then you have the attempted murder of future Trunks in Trunks' timeline when Trunks goes back to the future. This would be 20 years in prison up to life in prison. So based on all of this, if we calculated all the damage that Cell carried out in the span of the 6 volumes of Dragon Ball's manga from volume 30 to Dragon Ball manga volume 35, here's how many years in jail Cell would get. If we exclude the mass murder charges and just focus on the crimes he committed that didn't kill anybody, it'll be 976 years in prison. But when you add in all the murders that he carried out and treat every murder like an 81-year jail sentence, that number shoots up to a whopping 44,689,162 years in jail. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and checking out more videos from the Anime's Most Wanted playlist by clicking here on the left, or click here on the right for this video from my Anime Explained channel.